When you think of German football, you think of one of the most successful programs in international football. However, as of late, the current performances of Germany have been far from their best. So today we'll go into the history that shaped this program and find out why. Alright, sorry that this video essay was delayed for 6 months. Also, San Marino episode 2 will happen, just give me time because I got plans. I can't elaborate on that, but I got plans. I know a lot of you won't accept this, but perhaps we can make a compromise for the time being. I got merch, baby. See, I really wanted to create something that
we do not care about that. Get yourself one of these 6 shirts or even a hat that looks downright cold.
Anyways, I really wanted something that
we also got crew necks and hoodies that you can look styling in. If you want to buy any of this, just click the link in the description and you'll be taken to the merch's website. I think there will also be a YouTube shop extension, if I can get it to work. And if you do buy something, post yourself wearing the merch on your socials and tag me, cause I want to see you guys dripped out. Okay, back to the video essay.
Football arrived in Germany from the British Isles in 1873, 10 years after the formation of the English Football Association. The sport was played in the Rhineland amongst resident English merchants and industrialists. But because at the time everything related to the English was considered bad, the sport was seen as a disease to German society, and sports clubs forbid the practice of it almost everywhere. That was until the following year when August Hermann, a progressive gymnastics teacher, returned from a tour of multiple public schools in England with a ball. Together with another colleague and physical education teacher Conrad Cook, the two hosted what many consider today the first game on German soil. The earliest form of German football was primarily used to practice ethical values such as discipline and team spirit in addition to physical training. But in order for the sport to be allowed, the high school games didn't entirely resemble England's version. Instead, it looked more like rugby as players could use their hands to pick up the ball. As the years passed, however, the rules started to change. For example, playing with only your feet was initially introduced as a bad weather variant, but then was made mandatory in 1882. Despite the strides being made, however, many German conservatives, teachers, and parents were still committed to a culture war against the sport. However, another component that contributed to the acceptance of the game was Conrad Cook's translations of English football terms into German to create a unique football terminology for the country. He published a list in 1903, and to this day there are as many as 81 technical terms commonly used.
Giddy. Not working. Tits. No.
Abstiegsgespenst.
Yeah, German knows for.
Conrad Cook is considered a pioneer for German football. There was even a movie made in 2011 about his contributions to the sport called Lessons of a Dream. The actor who played Cook was Daniel Brühl, who just 2 years prior played Frederick Zoller in Inglourious Bastards. Throughout the 1880s, resistance against football started to slowly diminish as more people got into the sport. By this point, football had spread to other cities, and clubs started popping up in the likes of Hamburg and Karlsruhe. The first official football club, BFC Germania 1888, was founded in Berlin, a city which quickly became the center of football. BFC Germania is the oldest German club in existence today, but it's not the oldest ever. According to reports, there was an even older club by the name of Dresden English Football Club, which was founded in 1874 by, you guessed it, a bunch of Englishmen. In 1889, the first Southern German team, International Football Club, was founded by Walter Bensemann, another pioneer of football in Germany. 2 years later, Bensemann played a huge role in the founding of Karlsruhe FV, one of the most successful clubs during the pre-war period. Bensemann was also involved in the formation of the Frankfurt Kickers, who would later become Eintracht Frankfurt. His ventures didn't stop there. He organized international matches as means of cultural exchange as well. Then, in 1898, Walter put together a German national team to play against French and English teams. These games were Germany's first ever international matches. However, since they were played before the formation of a recognized sports federation, the matches weren't recognized as official international fixtures. By the late 1890s, there were over 100 different football clubs across the country affiliated with different regional associations hosting championships. This prompted calls for a federal organization of all regional associations in Germany. So, on January 28, 1900, in a restaurant called Zum Mariengarten in Leipzig, the Deutsche Fußball-Bund, or DFB, was founded, and 2 years later, the DFB joined FIFA. However, the new federal association wasn't able to bring every regional association under its umbrella, so as a result, the DFB struggled to form a championship of their own until 1903, which was won by VfB Leipzig. There was also disagreement between the DFB and regional associations about player selection before Germany's first official international match. However, after some discussions, the two parties decided to do selections based on player positions. So So for example, the DFB would assign a region a specific position, and the association of that region was only able to select footballers playing that position. It's a bit complicated. Believe it or not, that plan did actually organize things, but it also meant Germany weren't selecting their best possible teams. Because even if, say, you were a world-class striker, if your region wasn't assigned to picking a striker, you wouldn't be able to get into the national team. Another problem faced before Germany's inaugural match was conflicting schedules. While the DFB was organizing an international match, there were still championship games being hosted by regional associations. Due to this, most players denied call-ups as it was either too difficult to travel or they simply preferred to play for their clubs instead. Initially, the DFB was going to respond by penalizing players who denied call-ups. However, instead, the federation made a rule that if a club lost a game while a player was on international duty, the game could be played again. Jurgen Klopp would have loved that. In hindsight, this rule sucked, but it at least helped to relieve the schedule conflicts for the time being. And so at last, on April 5th, 1908, Germany played their first official match in Basel against Switzerland, where they lost 5-3. The national team played 2 more matches that year and lost both. The Germans didn't fare any better in 1909, as some English amateurs railed the Germans 9-0. This is still the national team's biggest defeat today. However, the Germans then had a change of fortune and got revenge against the Swiss to earn the national team's first ever victory. The sole scorer of that match was Jürgen Kipp, who would go on to have 10 goals in 18 caps. 3 years later, Germany competed in the 1912 Olympics, their first ever major tournament. They were immediately sent to the Shadow Realm, aka the consolation bracket, by Austria, but there, the Germans would go on to unleash hell upon the Russians in the first round. In that match, forward Gottfried Fuchs scored 10 goals, a world record he'd hold until a certain famous meeting. Unfortunately, in the semi-finals though, Germany was eliminated by eventual winners, Hungary. From there, the national team suffered a 6-game losing streak over the next 2 years. Thankfully though, the hopelessness ended after a 4-4 draw with the Dutch in 1914. This match though would turn out to be the last game for a while, as players were sent out to fight in World War I not too soon after. And unfortunately, this war would claim the lives of 12 national team players and end the careers of many more, one of which included Jürgen Kipp, who was severely injured in battle and eventually succumbed to his injuries in 1931. After World War I, European attitudes towards Germany changed drastically. France in particular would not call peace unless Germany paid reparations for the damage it had caused in the French countryside. This gave way to the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. We'll get back to that later in the video though. In the football world, sentiment towards Germany was just as bad, as Great Britain, France, and Belgium all refused to organize matches with the Germans. Germany was also barred from participation in the 1920 and 1924 Olympics. From 1920 to 1925, the Germans played friendlies with either anyone on their side during World War I or neutrals like the Netherlands, Norway, and Sweden. Results were often mixed, however, due to favoritism amongst various regional representatives who wanted to see their own play for the national team. Then in 1926, the DFB appointed school teacher Otto Ners as the first ever German national team coach. He led the Germans through the 1928 Olympics, where the team lost to eventual champions Uruguay in the quarterfinals. The Germans' top scorer in the tournament was Richard Hoffmann, who 2 years later became Germany's all-time leading scorer with 15 goals. That figure went up to 24 in 1932, and then shortly after, Hoffmann was kicked off the team after accepting an advertising deal with a smoking company. Not because smoking is bad, mind you, it was just because the DFB wanted to maintain its amateur status. Then in 1930, Germany declined an invitation to participate in the first ever World Cup. The reason was never made official, but it was probably because Germany couldn't afford a trip across the sea. Why was that? Well, the German economy was in the middle of a depression, and it turned to shit. You see, in order to cover costs of World War I, the Germans funded the war entirely by borrowing. Their plan was to pay off debts by winning the war and to impose reparations on the defeated opposition. But not only did Germany lose the war, the Treaty of Versailles demanded reparations from them. All the while this was going on, with German football strictly adhering to an amateur approach, clubs like Eintracht Frankfurt, Bayern Munich, VfB Stuttgart, Karlsruhe FV, and VfR Mannheim all were facing numerous economic issues and were struggling to keep their best players. On the other hand, smaller clubs were more than happy to maintain the status quo due to their unfamiliarity of problems bigger clubs faced and dependency on tax privileges. The DFB were very adamant on conserving amateur status, and because of this, tensions were pretty high, with bigger clubs threatening to leave if the Federation continued to refuse the allowal of professional football. One of the biggest proponents of the professionalization of German football at the time was the introduction of the Reichsliga in 1932. At the time, the way Germany's championship worked was that a winner from each of Germany's top regional divisions would then go on into the final round. The Reichsliga, however, would eliminate that multiple top-level leagues model and replace it with a single top division. That way, the German championship would provide a spectacle between the best teams throughout the entire year. This would provide more competition, challenges, and make way for professional status. However, with mass hyperinflation, millions unemployed, and political instability caused by Germany's debt crisis, totalitarian Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party rose to power in March 1933. Even though the dictator wasn't really interested in football, it was still the biggest sport in the country, so the regime felt the need to use it as propaganda. The new regime initially considered the Reichsliga, but ended up siding with the DFB because the party was more concerned about the Olympics, which at the time didn't allow professionals to compete. So instead, the government organized 16 regional leagues corresponding with the new administrative regions formed by the Nazis as a strategy to unify the nation. This new system was called the Go-Ligen, and as years went by, it would expand in line with Germany's conquest of Europe. Nazi Germany's hatred of Jewish people and goal of one superior race has been well documented, and the DFB was no exception. However, as opposed to the racial and ideological conviction of the delusional, the DFB looked at the exclusion of Jewish people through an economical and political standpoint. Jewish people played a major role as chairmen and sponsors of clubs advocating for professional football, so to maintain amateur status, the DFB urged Jewish people in positions of power to leave their posts. However, Bayern Munich was one of the few exceptions who showed resistance to this rampant discrimination. And although Jewish chairman Kurt Landauer and Jewish coach Richard Cohn were forced to resign in 1933, Landauer was still able to influence the club through its membership structure. When it came to Jewish athletes, the DFB didn't have the same conviction as other sports in excluding them. That being said, this doesn't mean the DFB were exempt from criticism. Their actions still make them responsible for the oppression and execution of countless Jewish people. In fact, multiple clubs emphasized their loyalty to the new government and immediately excluded their Jewish players. As a result, Jewish footballers banished by their clubs sought refuge at Jewish clubs and were harassed daily. The DFB and most of its clubs turned a blind eye to that oppression. Jewish German player Gottfried Fuchs was seen as a hero to his country 20 years prior when he scored 10 goals in one game. But in Nazi Germany, he was viewed as an inferior and his records were erased by the DFB. He then had to emigrate to Canada to escape being victim of a genocide. Striker Julius Hirsch, another Jewish German, was not so fortunate, however. The former striker helped Karlsruhe FV win the 1910 championship. He then became a youth coach for the club until 1933, when he learned that all southern German clubs would ban Jewish members. In 1938, Hirsch's children were then forced to leave school because they were seen as mixed Aryan and non-Aryan. 4 years later, Hirsch, in a heartbreaking effort to save his family from the regime, divorced his non-Jewish wife. Then, in 1943, he was deported and sent to a camp where he died in 1945. Hirsch and Fuchs are the only two Jewish Germans to play for the national team. Their legacies must live on for us to remember how much they gave to their country only to be betrayed in the end. One notable club that immediately pledged their allegiance to the regime was Schalke. The club from Gelsenkirchen experienced their most successful period during Germany's dark chapter and became heavily instrumentalized as a propaganda machine due to their working class culture. The club had numerous players of Polish descent, which prompted Polish media after Schalke won the title in 1934 to say, quote, "The German trophy is in the hands of Poland." In response, Schalke immediately wrote an open letter in which 13 players claimed, "Our parents were born in Germany. We are not Polish immigrants." Two of those players were forwards Fritz Stepan and Ernst Kuzora. Schalke's golden era owes much to the significant contributions of both. Fritz openly supported propaganda and urged people to follow. He also actively participated in the oppression of Jewish people by taking over a business called Kaufhaus Julius Roth & Co. The original owners, who were of Jewish descent, were deported and executed. All this cemented Stepan as the poster child of the national team during this dark chapter. Kuzora joined the party of the deluded as well, and it should be mentioned there was no requirement for footballers to actively join. That said, many claim he was apolitical. He also provided match tickets to Jewish children at his tobacco shop and even openly criticized the National Socialist sports policies. But it's all still complicated because, again, he joined the party. Aside from those two and center back Hans Bornemann, however, the rest of the players' approaches can be summed up by a quote, ironically enough, from Ernst Kuzora. "We just wanted to play football. Politics and religion didn't matter for us." While there were genuine members of the Party of the Deranged, the majority of players were just simply not opposed to the increasing politicization of football, whether out of fear or even indifference.
I believe it should be mentioned that Schalke are no longer the club that they used to be in the past, and although Schalke was the only example I used for this, there were plenty of other clubs that were used as propaganda.
The German national team played over 100 games during the Chapter of Hate. The team made their World Cup debut in 1934. In fascist Italy. Then in 1936, the Olympics were held in Germany. By the way, in order to simmer down controversy for this event for obvious reasons, Olympic organizers, businessmen, and politicians were invited for sanitized visits. Sounds a bit familiar, doesn't it? Hitler wanted to use the games as means of promoting the superiority of the master race by dominating athletic competitions. This dude was 5'9", by the way. Nevertheless, Germany started the tournament hot with a 9-0 drubbing of Luxembourg in the round of 16. Their opponents in the next round was Norway, and in attendance was old scum himself for his first ever football match. With a bunch of other demented high officials, Hitler expected another demolition job, but instead witnessed Norway embarrass him at his own Olympics. His fragile ego was broken so badly that he left before the end of the game, and the defeat was enough to put him off ever attending another football match again. And soon after, manager Otto Nurse resigned in disgrace and was replaced by his assistant Sepp Herberger. Following the failure at the Olympics, Germany annexed Austria in 1938, and in the process robbed the Austrians' famous Wunder team of a great chance to win the World Cup. However, before the Austrian national team disbanded, it would play one last match against Germany in April of that same year. One of the players involved in the match was Captain Matthias Sindelar, Austria's greatest ever footballer. Sindelar was known as the Mozart of football for his dazzling dribbling ability and infinite creativity. Much like the Austrians on the team, Sindelar was against the annexation of his home nation, and at his behest, instead of their traditional white and black uniforms, the Austrians played their last international game in red and white, which mimicked the flag of Austria's colors. Throughout the match, the Austrians constantly mocked the so-called superior race by purposely squandering numerous scoring opportunities. Then in the last 20 minutes, Sindelar and Karl Sesta both scored to give Austria one last act of greatness. However, this story ends in tragedy, as in early 1938, Sindelar and his girlfriend were both found deceased in their apartment. The official verdict cited carbon monoxide poisoning as the cause, but that didn't stop theories from being made. One said that he was eliminated for his opposition of the annexation, and a local official was bribed to record Sindelar's death as accidental to ensure a state funeral. Because, according to law at the time, a person who had been killed or ended their life couldn't be given a grave of honor. It should also be mentioned that the German secret police had a file on Sindelar and kept his cafe under surveillance. Prior to the Anschluss, the German national team went on their best run yet. The side, nicknamed the Breslau 11, went unbeaten in all 11 games they played in 1937, winning 10 of them, including an 8-0 pummeling of Denmark. This German side was to be feared in the 1938 World Cup. However, due to the regime wanting to show unity, manager Sepp Herberger was forced to include Austrian players, and with it came the end of the short-lived Breslau 11. This was on a very short notice. Preparations for the tournament were lacking, and to make things even funnier, the Austrians were getting older and probably didn't care. As a result, Germany embarrassed themselves and lost on penalties in the last 16 against Switzerland. With so many failures because of the regime's own poor decisions, they found a scapegoat in the DFB, citing a growing lack of trust. There was even a district leader who cited German football, and in particular the DFB, as an example of what he saw as a, quote, completely misguided development in German sports. Anyways, all this salt from the Ministry of Sports eventually led to the dissolving of the Federation in 1940. But in no way did this stop the Nazis from taking even more L's. The national team a year later lost to Switzerland again, and this time on April 20th. I'll let you guess whose birthday it was that day. This actually prompted the Minister of Propaganda to write a letter to the sports ministry leader which said, quote, above all, no sports exchange should be made if the result is the least doubtful.
Losers, in other words.
Then in 1942, Kiev-based FC Start humiliated a German military team 5-3, despite the looming threat of inevitable death had they won, and the referee being a literal German officer. Even though every player on FC Start after the famously dubbed death match was killed, the loss put the regime's super race philosophy in dire jeopardy. It was at this point the regime started to consider professionalizing the game. However, the events of World War II put a stop to all these plans as footballers were sent out onto the front lines. Many would not return. After World War II and the atrocities that led up to it, Germany was once again barred from every single competition. The ban wasn't lifted until 1949, and by then the country was looking a lot different. Immediately after the war, the victorious Allies divided Germany into 4 parts. The western portion, excluding the Tsar Protectorate, became the Federal Republic of Germany in 1949. In the same year, the Soviet-occupied East became the German Democratic Republic. All these new territories would have their own national teams as well. The Saarland national team was made up of mostly players from FC Saarbrücken. The only tournament they attempted to qualify for was World Cup 1954, and they failed. Then, after a referendum in 1955, the Saarland became part of the Federal Republic of Germany in 1957. In the German Democratic Republic, there was the East Germany national team. The East Germans lasted much longer than the Saarland and made numerous attempts to qualify for the World Cup and Euros. However, they were only able to qualify for the 1974 World Cup. We'll get back to that later though. But most of the success found was in the Olympics. Between 1964 and 1980, East Germany won bronze twice, silver once, and gold once in 1976. Completely off topic by the way, during the group stages of the 1976 Olympics, North Korean player An Gil-won was suspended for throwing a bottle at the ref. East Germany's all-time leading scorer was Joachim Streich with 53 goals. That would today put him 38th amongst the all-time leading international scorers. But following the reunification of Germany in 1990, the GDR dissolved and with it, the national team as well. In the Federal Republic of Germany is where we'll continue the rest of this story. Most pre-war organizations were carried on by the FRG, and the DFB was no exception as they were reinstated in 1949. With recognition by FIFA and UEFA, the DFB maintained and continued record of the pre-war team as West Germany. West Germany played their first match against Switzerland in November 1950, but unlike the OG national team, they won their inaugural match 1-0. And under the guidance of Sepp Herberger, the national team qualified for World Cup 1954. Germany kicked off their tournament beating Turkey 4-1. Then, knowing they could lose to tournament favorites Hungary without risking elimination, Herberger played a far weaker side and the West Germans were defeated 8-3. Following the loss, the national team met Turkey once again in the playoffs and cremated them to move on to the next round. Yugoslavia were taken care of in the quarters, then Austria was dismantled in the semis, which brings us back to where it all started. West Germany versus Hungary in the final. Going into the match, Hungary's golden generation were clear favorites, having scored a total of 25 goals in the tournament up to this point. The mighty Magyars had destroyed every opponent that came up against them, and everyone expected nothing different against the Germans. And it sure started that way, as Hungary looked to eat up the Germans early on. However, this wasn't the same West German side the Hungarians faced in the groups. The DFB team replied right back through Max Morlock and Helmut Rahn. Then, in the 84th minute, their boss himself, Helmut Rahn, produced one of the greatest shocks in World Cup history. After playing just 25 games together, West Germany against all odds won their first ever World Cup, and the unexpected triumph gave rise to a feeling of elation across a divided post-war Germany. Das Wunder von Bern, the miracle of Bern. West Germany would defend their title 4 years later in the famous 1958 World Cup. They won their group thanks to goals from their boss and Uwe Seeler. Seeler throughout his career scored 43 goals, putting him today 8th in Germany's all-time leading scorers. The striker is regarded as one of the greatest German footballers to ever live. There's also a giant monument of his right foot. Don't get any ideas. The national team again took care of Yugoslavia in the quarters, but then were eliminated by Sweden in the semis. 4 years later, the DFB team qualified for the 1962 edition hosted in Chile. In a group consisting of Italy, Switzerland, and the hosts, West Germany conquered. However, in the quarterfinals, they lost to Yugoslavia. This would be the last tournament for Sepp Herberger, who retired 2 years later in 1964. The legacy of Sepp Herberger is extremely complicated. He was the mastermind behind the Breslau 11 and the Miracle of Bern that created a sense of euphoria across post-war Germany. Herberger was also very vocal about the professionalization of the German game. And when confidence in the national team from high officials dropped during Germany's dark chapter, footballers became more at risk of being sent out to fight. Herberger, though, fought for his players' safety, going as far as to even falsify documents to prevent them from being sent out on the front lines. And yet, the manager was a member of the Party of Hatred. Not to say he was a member out of conviction, but much like the rest of German football, he was willingly used as a tool for propaganda, which included a feature in a propaganda film made in 1941. The coach mainly did this to arrange players to be a part of the movie to keep them away from the horrors of war. But that said, Herberger still allowed himself to be used as a pawn for the regime. Herberger's tactical genius is to not be doubted. He was one of the most influential figures in German football's long history, but that will always be poisoned by his role in a regime that committed inhumane acts for an inhumane ideology. After After World War II, the Go-Ligen was dissolved and replaced by the Oberligen, or Upper Leagues, which had 5 regional leagues. But just like the original championship and the Go-Ligen that followed, its lack of competitiveness failed to enhance the German game. Sepp Herberger had been very vocal for professionalization over multiple decades, but ironically enough, his masterclass in 1954 was always used against him to dismiss any need for a new league format. However, throughout the rest of the 1950s, semi-professional clubs in Germany found themselves losing their best players to other countries with professional leagues, which eventually led to the disappointment that was World Cup 1962, which finally awoke the DFB from its complacency. After numerous failed attempts of professionalizing the game in the last 3 decades, finally the best clubs in Germany were going to duke it out against one another on a weekly basis, as the brand new Bundesliga was officially approved on July 28, 1962. On top of this, the DFB raised the maximum monthly income and now allowed clubs to pay their stars even more. With the end of the Sepp Herberger era, Helmut Schön took over the national team in 1964, and his first task was to help West Germany bounce back in World Cup 1966. With goals coming from Helmut Haller and 20-year-old midfielder Franz Beckenbauer, the DFB team returned to the final to face England in their backyard. At the end of regulation time, it was 2 apiece after a last-minute equalizer from Wolfgang Weber, who kinda looks like Kyle Korver. Didn't think you'd expect 2 Kyle Korver references in 1 year, huh? I didn't either. Into extra time, the West Germans fended off numerous attacks from the English. West Germany finally conceded in the 101st minute with a goal that may or may not have gone over the line. This goal is one of the most controversial in World Cup history, and to this day, people debate whether or not the ball crossed the line. My thoughts? Well, I personally like pissing off the bigger crowd, so it didn't cross the line. Nonetheless, this goal was followed up by another controversial one, this time because English fans were on the pitch thinking the game was already over. However, the DFB did get their revenge in the quarterfinals of the next World Cup after West Germany came back from 2-0 down to beat the English in extra time. The national team would then play Italy in the semis. With a highly talented squad consisting of goalkeeper Sepp Maier, right back Berti Vogts, midfielder Wolfgang Overath, and a deadly alliance in Gerd Müller and Uwe Seeler, the Germans fell 1-0 down early on. Italy had only conceded 1 goal across the whole tournament, but somehow in the dying minutes, center back Karl-Heinz Schnellinger scored an equalizer to take the game to extra time. It was then when West Germany struck first through 25-year-old Gerd Müller in the 94th minute. However, Italy then responded with 2 unanswered from Tarcisio Bergnick in the 98th minute and then Gigi Riva in the 104th minute. Nonetheless, Gerd Müller then made it 3-0 with the 10th goal of his debut tournament. But while the cameras were showing replays, Italy immediately stormed up the pitch, and Gianni Rivera would clinch victory for the Azzurri in what both Germans and Italians would call the game of the century. In 1971, just a year after the chaotic semi-final, Franz Beckenbauer was named captain of the national team. The midfielder turned sweeper in defense went on to lead a squad of West German superpowers to a trophy in their first attempt at the European Championship in 1972. 1974's World Cup was extra special, with West Germany as hosts. The national team defeated Chile and Australia to set up a group-deciding match against none other than East Germany. Despite the political aversion that was present between the two states, friendlies between clubs from either side of the divide were pretty common throughout the 1950s. The number of matchups diminished in the 1960s, however, with Cold War tensions growing out of control. However, fast forward to a World Cup in a divided Germany, the group draws, as they've shown countless times, even today, usually don't think twice before risking another world war. I mean, I wouldn't be particularly surprised if one day we see DEFCON 1 because of FIFA. Nonetheless, it was the capitalist West versus the communist East in West Germany. Both governments salivated at the idea of overcoming the other. But to ordinary fans, most didn't care about promoting any agenda. This was merely an opportunity to come in contact with each other in hopes of reuniting once more. In fact, there was a number of people living in the East who wanted West Germany to win because they didn't want to see the East dictatorial regime strengthen its reputation through sporting exploits. West Germany were favorites going into this match. They were undoubtedly the far more superior side. But with so much political backdrop, everyone was very cautious not to make a mistake. It was really anyone's game to win. After a dull first half, the two German sides started picking up the pace, however, and then to everyone's shock, Jürgen Sparwasser of East Germany would score the winner in the 77th minute. Communism had prevailed over capitalism, and with this unbelievable triumph, East Germany won the group. West Germany, after the result, were actually quite grateful to the East Germans, because it triggered a revolt against manager Helmut Schön, who had been indecisive and hesitant throughout the tournament. This led the national team turning to the leadership of the now 29-year-old Franz Beckenbauer. Even though they finished runners-up, West Germany actually had the more favorable second group and steamrolled past their opponents to reach the final. The final boss this time was even greater, a Dutch side playing an exciting revolutionary style of football. total football. This team was spearheaded by the ultimate genius of Johan Cruyff, who won a penalty for the Dutch in just the first minute after his elusive run through the West German defense. "But anything you can do, I can do better," said West Germany's left back Paul Breitner in the 25th minute. Then before halftime, the ever so clinical Gerd Müller scored West Germany's second. The Netherlands tried everything they could to get an equalizer, but Iron Curtain Sepp Maier made save after save. And so West Germany won their second World Cup and had the privilege of lifting the brand new FIFA World Cup trophy. Gerd Müller, for a second consecutive time, was West Germany's top scorer in the tournament with 4 goals. However, after the triumph of 1974, Müller retired from the national team at age 28. It was allegedly due to him being unhappy that players' wives were not permitted to attend the post-final banquet, but officials' wives were. Nicknamed Der Bomber, Gerd Müller is remembered as one of the greatest goal scorers in the history of the sport. The striker played most of his career at Bayern Munich, where he scored 398 goals in 453 appearances. For the national team, Müller became the all-time leading goal scorer with 68 goals in 62 caps, a record that he'd hold for decades. That wasn't the only record he held, however. Across 2 World Cups, he scored 14 times in just 13 games, a record that would stand until 2006. And in the Bundesliga, he held the record for the most goals in a season with 40 until just recently. Müller would retire from football entirely in 1981 and is one of 9 players to have won the World Cup, Champions League, and Ballon d'Or. Oh yeah, going back to Sepp Maier because I didn't really know where to insert this. One time during his Bayern days when he was bored during a match, he spotted a duck and tried to catch it. I don't know. Thought that was just kind of funny. Anyways, next was Euro 1976, and the reigning champions had the task of retaining their crown. West Germany again reached the final, but unfortunately fell to Czechoslovakia on penalties. This event, however, triggered the Germans' Willenark, which would lead them to be unstoppable at the spot throughout the rest of time. However, this would be Franz Beckenbauer's last tournament, as he retired from the national team just a year later. Franz is considered one of the greatest players to grace the pitch. Living up to the nickname Der Kaiser, or the Emperor, Beckenbauer was a commander of the pitch from the deepest outfield position. In the sweeper role he modernized, the captain would make sure the team was always structured and efficient with as much of the ball as possible. And with such wide versatility, there was no stopping him from progressing forward and creating chances with his superlative football IQ. Regarded as one of the greatest defenders of all time, Der Kaiser is actually the only defender to win the Ballon d'Or. The retirement of Franz Beckenbauer proved to be an irreplaceable loss for the DFB team, as in World Cup 1978, they barely escaped their first group and then were eliminated in the second round after an embarrassing loss to Austria. And following the disappointing run, Helmut Schön stepped down as manager after 14 years. The legendary manager holds the record for the most World Cup matches coached with 25 and most World Cup matches won as a manager with 16. The next man to take charge of the national team was Schön's assistant, Jupp der Wall. He guided the West Germans to the final of Euro 1980, where Horst Hrubesch's heroic header won the DFB team their second European championship in just 8 years. Der Wall's next challenge was World Cup 1982, and the West Germans were shocked by Algeria in their opening fixture. Nevertheless, thanks to a hat-trick from Karl-Heinz Rummenigge. Oh, Jesus.
This one's from La Janus, right? He says, Robbie, what's your thought on Kane leaving?
But with Algeria becoming the first African and Arab team to win twice at a World Cup, it meant West Germany were in danger of crashing out. Luckily for the DFB team, Algeria played their third game a day before. So with Austria and West Germany knowing exactly what results they both needed to advance, they fixed the match and f***ed over Algeria. By the way, this is now the third time a match between Austria and Germany has been deemed infamous in some way or another. But having faced no consequences, West Germany did just enough to advance out of the second group stage to face France in the semis. The DFB team drew first blood through Pierre Litbarski. I know, a guy named Pierre playing for the West German team scoring against France. Yeah, it confuses me too.
Oh yeah, I also just learned that Pierre played for Brummel Sendai, which is now Vegalta Sendai. The more you know, I guess.
But 10 minutes later, West Germany conceded a penalty and Michel Platini converts. The second half didn't see any goals, however, it did see attempted murder. But much like 1970's game of the century, the game ramped up in extra time. 92 minutes played, a ball is crossed to Marius Tresser, who was as wide open as that one dude from Enumclaw. 6 minutes later, Alain Giresse sends a strike off the bar into the nets and France is starting to run away with it. West Germany was keen on catching up though, as Karl-Heinz gave the team a lifeline. Then just like France, 6 minutes later, Klaus Fischer with all the time in the world goes for the spectacular with perfection. Penalties followed, and of course, West Germany prevailed. The national team did end up losing 3-1 to Italy in the final, but in all fairness, this Italian side was just different sauce. In Euro 1984, West Germany attempted to defend their title. However, they crashed out after losing to Spain. Jupp der Wall called it quits after the tournament. The future was looking bright though, with young stars like 24-year-old forward Rudi Völler and 23-year-old midfielder Lothar Matthäus. These two became key players in the World Cup 1986 squad, which was led by new manager Kaiser, Franz Beckenbauer. Der Kaiser didn't have the best start at his new role, as West Germany went on a 6-game winless streak throughout 1985, the nation's worst ever run. Fortunately, Beckenbauer polished up his tactics, turned the tide, and led West Germany to their 5th World Cup final where they just missed out on winning it all. Quick side note, early into the tournament, Beckenbauer sent Uli Stein home for calling the manager a Suppenkasper, laughingstock in German, soup jackass in Google Translate. Beckenbauer tried at silverware again in Euro 1988, but once more fell short due to a late goal. His next try at ultimate glory would come in World Cup 1990, but not without some more political backdrop. On November 9th, 1989, the East German government announced the border crossing points between them and the West would be opened with immediate effect. This gave way to one of the most iconic moments in human history, the fall of the Berlin Wall, an encapsulation of German reunification. It was only 6 days later that West Germany had to get a result in their last qualifier against Wales to earn a berth to World Cup Italia. With the wall still on players' minds, however, focus and preparation for such an important game practically diminished and West Germany conceded early on. But perhaps some of that euphoria of a new reunified Germany coursed through the veins of the players as the DFB team came back from the scare to win 2-1 and qualify. Into the tournament, Lothar Matthäus at the peak of his powers was named captain, and alongside his fellow countrymen with swagger in their step and their drip,
he got that on though.
The West Germans went unbeaten in the group stages. Beckenbauer's men then faced the Dutch, and after an infamous spitting incident, the West Germans put them down. A single penalty from the skipper against Czechoslovakia then set up a bout against England in the semis. In the match, a deflected shot from Andreas Brehme in the 60th minute gave the West Germans the lead. However, Mr. Shout on the pitch himself scored the equalizer 20 minutes later. Nothing could separate the two, which gave way to penalties, and the DFB prevailed to reach the World Cup final for a 3rd consecutive time. The final of World Cup 1990 was on brand with the Italian 90s intro. Ugly as hell. Argentina, who had gotten here through 2 penalty shootouts, defended the whole game in hopes of going to another penalty shootout, which resulted in a lopsided West German offensive featuring Brexit tackles from the Argentinians.
It could have been killed.
The cynical final was finally put out of its own misery through the only way it knew how to: a questionable penalty. Andreas Brehme stepped up, scored, and West Germany finally reclaimed the World Cup trophy once again in what would be their last ever World Cup match. The new German national team had many in the now unified country excited. Beckenbauer even said in a post-match conference, "I'm sorry for the other countries, but now that we will be able to incorporate all the great players from the East, the German team will be unbeatable for a long time." But despite the hype of a German super team that was most importantly humane, it didn't really live up to expectations. The problem was, East Germany was ran by an authoritarian government which saw sports as a tool to shape national identity. This was most evident through East Germany's history of giving its elite athletes performance-enhancing drugs to improve the state's image. In football, the communist regime always demanded togetherness even if it was at the expense of the result. Any showing of individualism would be punished, as seen in the case of defensive midfielder Matthias Sammer. Sammer was known for his flair and goal-scoring ability, 2 aspects of his game that made him stand out above the rest. His club, Dynamo Dresden, was headed by a member of the East German secret police, the Stasi. They didn't approve of how Sammer played the sport and would make it clear that his ideals weren't tolerated through harassment. The state's extensive interference into footballers' lives resulted in many defecting to the West. Some were lucky to get off without a punishment by the Stasi, like Frank Lippmann, but others weren't, like Lutz Eigendorf. Lutz was one of the best footballers in the East and played for Stasi-sponsored BFC Dynamo. However, in 1979, while his team's bus was fueling up, he escaped to the West via taxi. Defections were common, but this one in particular was embarrassing for the East because of Eigendorf's status as a star player. So while he played for West German clubs after his escape, there were a number of informants hired by the Stasi to spy on Eigendorf. Then in 1983, Lutz died in a suspicious car accident. An autopsy indicated high blood alcohol. However, witnesses claimed he had only drunk a small amount of beer. 8 years later after this death, though, with the reunification of Germany, footballers in the East no longer had to worry about the restrictions laid upon the sport. But having been taught a completely different game where individualism was prohibited since youth, ideals of most footballers from the East clashed with the national team players from the West. 8 East German players were capped for Germany, but the only ones to make an impact in the starting 11 were Matthias Sammer and forward Ulf Kirsten. It would take even longer, however, for East German clubs to find success in a reunified nation. They were able to participate in the Bundesliga after reunification, but because they were no longer funded by the state, East German clubs were left severely underfunded compared to their Western counterparts. Only now, 30 years since reunification, are we seeing Eastern German clubs re-emerge in the top flight. After Beckenbauer resigned, Germany hired the starting right-back of West Germany's World Cup 1974 winning squad, Berti Vos.
So many bookings in a game, was the attitude of the players a problem?
No, you know, it was a big fight for both teams, and I think it was a lot of Chris.
The new German national team's first match was against Switzerland. I think we're starting to see a pattern here. Their first tournament was Euro 1992, where the DFB reached the final but were stunned by Denmark. In World Cup 1994, Germany managed to win its group but then suffered another upset at the hands of Bulgaria in the quarterfinals. After the tournament, Rudi Völler retired from the national team. He finished his international career second in Germany's all-time leading scorers with 47 goals. Due to a feud between captain Jürgen Klinsmann and manager Vots, 35-year-old Lothar Matthäus was left out of the squad for Euro 1996. But that didn't faze the national team at all, as Germany breezed past their group, defeated Croatia in the quarters, beat England on penalties, again, and then finally a golden goal from Oliver Bierhoff sealed the Germans' third European Championship title.
It's coming home, it's coming home, it's coming, football's coming home.
The champions of Europe 2 years later took on World Cup 1998, where they were placed in this group. Who let this happen? Politically charged matches weren't anything new for Germany though, as they won the group with ease. In the last 16, the Germans conceded to Mexico early in the second half, but rallied back in the last 16 to win the match. Then in the quarterfinals, they sputtered and were comfortably beaten by Croatia. And after a disappointing end to the tournament, Berti Vogts resigned. Now with the national team's golden era long gone and their current squad slowly declining, the DFB were desperate to find anyone interested in taking the job.
Hey there, brother. Do you have time to talk about
The German national team.
Oh, your death? Oh, okay. Well, you have yourself a blessed day.
Okay, you too.
You mother.
The Federation looked into established managers like Real's Jupp Heynckes and Bayern Munich's Ottmar Hitzfeld, but they both quickly ruled themselves out of the running. There were even considerations of hiring the first ever foreign German national team manager. Options included Giovanni Trapattoni and even Roy Hodgson. Fans, on the other hand, were drawn towards former international Uli Stielecke, an astute tactician with a modern approach to the game. After being interviewed by the Federation, Stielecke was convinced he had the job nailed down. He was so convinced that he went as far as to even express his joy publicly. But the DFB had other ideas and appointed 61-year-old Eric Riebeck out of retirement as the new manager, while Uli Stielecke was given the assistant coach role.
Embarrassing!
Eric Riebeck's first tournament was the 1999 Confederations Cup, where he stunk up the show with his lack of tactical knowledge and approach so narrow-minded that even Greg Berhalter would be impressed. Germany could only scratch a win against New Zealand and crashed out of their group, and as a consequence, many in the squad started losing trust in their manager. Things got even worse when a month before Euro 2000, Stielecke resigned, citing irreconcilable differences between himself and the coach. In their first match of the tournament, Germany were lucky to manage a draw with Romania. This caused serious rifts to form within the squad, and players found themselves drawn into separate cliques that Riebeck was unable to deal with. Now, Riebeck could have saved the situation just at least a little bit, but instead, he decided this was the year to beat a meat-eating world record. For whatever reason, Riebeck was extremely adamant on playing a geriatric 39-year-old Lothar Matthäus who was about 5 meals away from perishing.
Entering Glizzy Overdrive. Increasing grip by 7%.
This decision, as you could only imagine, didn't go well with the squad, but Riebeck was not budging. One of the players who wasn't happy about the decision was captain Oliver Bierhoff, who before Germany's second match versus England tore a calf muscle and was ruled out for the rest of the tournament. He would later criticize Riebeck publicly after the tournament. And you know you f***ed up when Der Kaiser himself, now vice president of the DFB, criticizes your decisions and says Germany has no chance of winning the tournament.
He doesn't stand for what I stand for. And I denounce, I repudiate, and condemn him. Basically,
Germany had been unbeaten against England in the last 34 years, but thanks to yet another Riebeck disaster class, that record was no more as the Germans lost 1-0 to a slightly less inept English side. The Germans were then exiled and put out of their misery by Portugal's Sergio Conceição. Shortly after Germany's elimination, Eric Riebeck was desperate to have the final say and blamed the players for Germany's abysmal performance. And he's not entirely wrong. This generation of German football had been on its last leg for quite some time now, and like Virginia Tech players nowadays, the Germans lacked fight and it seemed like no player really wanted to be there in the first place. That all said, it's the manager's responsibility to make the players care, and Riebeck's tactics were more underwhelming than the entirety of Marvel Phase 4 so far. Finally though, after a disgraceful display of tactically weak football, or what Beckenbauer called Rumpelfussler, Ribbeck resigned, and after being glazed by the gravedigger, Lothar Matthäus retired from the national team. Even though he left the national team on a sour note, Lothar left a legacy years prior and finished his career as the most capped player for Germany with 150 appearances. On top of winning the World Cup in 1990, the unstoppable box-to-box midfielder also won himself a Ballon d'Or and the first ever FIFA World Player of the Year. And to this day, Lothar Matthäus is regarded as one of the most complete midfielders of all time. The future of German football was certainly looking bleak, but behind the scenes, something was brewing. After winning their third European Championship in 1996, manager Berti Vogts urged the DFB president Ejidis Brown to do more to foster German youth development. At the time, the DFB had only been concerned with youth national teams, and Vogts proposed the installation of a German FA coach inside each regional association for gifted kids who weren't part of the club's system. However, Brown rejected the idea, calling it unrealistic. The president then turned to Dietrich Weise. Weise was a youth coach for West Germany in 1978 and completely overhauled the way the country approached scouting. At the time, the decrease in talents was widely seen as a sociological issue. There was even a theory going around about how football was suffering because of the appeal of individual activities like the gym or even playing video games like Mario, Zelda, or Sakura B. The DFB youth coordinator at the time, Michael Skibe, added in 2001 that there was very little social pressure to improve your position in society through sports. Weisse thought all this was nonsense, however. He believed there was plenty of talent in Germany. The real issue was that scouts and recruiters were failing to get to them, and the players they did get to didn't spend enough time training with the ball. Together with colleague Ulf Schott, who had just graduated in sports science, the two visited all regional federations and other national federations. They even spoke to managers in other sports. What the two discovered in 9 months of research was that youngsters who weren't playing for a professional club were going unnoticed. So in an effort to give every kid a chance, the two proposed a comprehensive talent spotting and development scheme with the help of a network of 115 regional centers all across the country. Initially, the idea was rejected by the DFB in spring 1998 due to costs. But following Germany's loss to Croatia in the World Cup, the board approved Weisse's blueprint. Now with the okay, the two colleagues went across Germany for an entire year looking for suitable locations for their new network. They'd even visit clubs in remote areas where Weisse would talk councils into making their pitches available. He promised dozens of former professionals to work as coaches, provided equipment, and even money to cover costs for parents. In the end, just over £1 million were made available to set up 121 regional centers that would provide once a week 2 hours of individual and technical coaching for over 4,000 kids aged 13 to 17. This network now meant everyone had access to a regional center within 25 kilometers of their home. The DFB would then centralize football education for 11 and 12-year-olds, which increased the number of locations in the national network to 366 locations. This now meant a total of 600,000 talents could be seen at least once by one of the over 1,300 qualified coaches every year. Grassroots was just the beginning of Weisse's plan, however. After Germany's embarrassing exit from Euro 2000, everyone was demanding reforms, especially after Germany won a totally not corrupt bid to host the World Cup in 2006. Weisse, the DFB, and the Bundesliga decided that the development of more technically proficient homegrown players would be in everyone's interests. Changes were formalized, and in the 2002-03 season onwards, in order to obtain a professional license, a club was now required to have their own academy system. Ironically enough, it seemed like money didn't even matter anymore, because in the first 2 years, 36 clubs invested a combined 114 million euros into their brand new elite talent hubs. Then in 2004, the DFB introduced a nationwide U19 Bundesliga. A U17 version was formed 3 years later. This naturally created more competition amongst clubs to see which had the best academy and encouraged them to spend more on youth coaches. The development of talent through the Bundesliga accelerated even more, with the DFB putting a focus on giving coaches a stellar education. This generated a new wave of coaching talent who would introduce a new brand of football in Germany based on fast-paced and dynamic transitional play. One of those new coaches was Ralf Rangnick, who would go on to become one of Germany's most influential coaches. The DFB also emphasized general education for young talent. That way the majority who couldn't make it as a pro could still receive a higher education, and those who could make it were able to use their skills they learned in general ed to quickly understand tactics and advice given by their coaches. But despite their efforts to quicken the process, it would still take quite some time for Das Reboot to translate onto the pitch. In the meantime, the national team was looking for its next head coach after Eric Riebeck put on a worse performance than Megan Fox's voice acting in Mortal Kombat 1. The next in line to take over was manager Christoph Daum. In his 4 years with Bayer Leverkusen, he led Die Werkself to 3 second-place finishes in the Bundesliga. However, it was then rumored by his rival Uli Hoeneß that Daum had been engaging in cocaine-fueled with prostitutes. This would sound like the most insane thing to happen in German football, but I mean, you've watched up to this point. In response to these rumors, Daum immediately threatened to sue for defamation and even gave hair samples to prove his innocence. Keep in mind, by the way, he wasn't forced by anyone to do a test. This was his own doing. The samples, though, came back positive for cocaine, but Daum then doubled down and demanded a second sample be tested. That one came back positive as well. He didn't back down, though, and called for the samples he gave to be genetically analyzed. However, 1 year later, he finally admitted to taking cocaine, but the damage to his reputation had already been done. He lost his job with Leverkusen and had his contract with the DFB annulled. Instead, the DFB went with Rudi Völler. Going into World Cup 2002, expectations were low due to the Germans not directly qualifying for the first time ever. But perhaps going under the radar worked in their favor though, as in their opener, Germany put a beat down on the Saudis that even the Alabama riverfront would be shocked by. Star midfielder 25-year-old Michael Ballack was brilliant, but it would be 23-year-old Miroslav Klose who would steal the show with his hat-trick of headers and front flip. Klose gave the world more acrobatics in the next game against Ireland, however Robbie Keane showed off some of his own in response. Nevertheless, the Germans capped off the group stage with a 2-0 win against Cameroon, and Klose grabbed his 5th goal of the tournament. Front flip man would not be the hero for Germany in the knockouts, however. Instead, the nation's unlikely ambitions laid upon goalkeeper Oliver Kahn's hands of steel. With his incredible reaction timing, Germany reached the final without conceding once in the knockouts. They grabbed a last-minute goal versus Paraguay in the last 16, then Michael Ballack pulled up in the quarters and scored the only goal of the game against the US.
My family, my brothers, my sisters, they've been taken from me!
Number 13 arrived on the scene once more in the semis when he bagged the winner against the fairest team in the tournament. However, Ballack would be suspended for the final due to yellow card accumulation. Nonetheless, the Germans had faced bigger setbacks in the past. Kahn had been not just the best performing keeper, but the best performing player in the entire tournament. Unfortunately though, football can be quite cruel sometimes. Germany conceded a second Brazilian goal minutes later and lost yet another final. However, having defied the odds and outperformed expectations, the future of German football was looking brighter sooner than everyone anticipated. After yet another abysmal performance in the Euros where Germany couldn't even beat Latvia, Rudi Völler resigned as manager. Former international Jürgen Klinsmann would then take the helm. The striker finished his international career tied for second in Germany's all-time leading scorers. Now a manager for the country he played for all those years back, Klinsmann's main goal was to give German football an identity and entrusted the new generation of talent to make it happen. Euro 2004 may have been Germany's nadir, but one player who stuck out above the rest was 21-year-old fullback Philipp Lahm. Another player who showed promise was 20-year-old midfielder Bastian Schweinsteiger. In Germany's loss to the Czech Republic's B team, he assisted the opening goal. Backtracking to 2003, Polish media suggested head coach Paweł Janusz call up an 18-year-old Lukas Podolski to the Polish national team. Podolski, who was born in Poland but grew up in Germany, had been interested in representing the Poles. Janusz, however, ignored the request, believing he already had much better strikers and didn't see a reason to call up a player who, quote, wasn't even a regular starter at his club. Months later, Podolski finished the 2003-04 season with 10 goals in 19 appearances. When Germany came calling, he accepted, cementing Janusz's name amongst the hull of bag fumblers. Other players Jürgen Klinsmann called up included debutants like 19-year-old BFG Per Mertesacker and 20-year-old defender Robert Huth. When he first started out, Klinsmann came under criticism for his youthful approach to the regeneration of the national team, especially after a 4-1 defeat to Italy just months before the World Cup. That result saw Germany fall to 22nd in the world, their worst ever ranking. Klinsmann created even more controversy though, when after taking the captain's armband from Oliver Kahn, he then named Jens Lehmann the #1 keeper. This resulted in a pretty big feud between the two keepers that would even stretch past the World Cup. Regardless of the drama, Germany opened their World Cup with a 4-2 victory against Costa Rica. Philipp Lahm scored a beauty off the post, Klose had 2 for himself, and then Torsten Frings' banger capped off a wonderful performance. Germany's next game was against Poland, with most of the spotlight on the two Polish-born players of Miroslav Klose and Lukas Podolski. But neither made any impact. Instead, 2 super subs linked up into stoppage time and caused Dortmund to erupt in noise. Then to cap off a perfect group stage performance, Germany defeated Ecuador 3-0. Klose collected his 3rd and 4th of the World Cup, and Lukas Podolski, after so much pressure on him, finally scored his 1st of the tournament. Podolski then carried this performance in the knockouts and bagged 2 more to lead the Germans past Sweden. In the quarters, Germany didn't start out well against rivals Argentina, but Klose came to save the day in the last 10 minutes. The game then went to penalties, penalties, and before the shootout, Jens Lehmann and Oliver Kahn put their differences aside, for now, and Kahn gave his teammates some words of encouragement. The goalkeeping coach Andres Kupka then handed Lehmann a cheat sheet, if you will. Lehmann went on to save 2 penalties, and Germany prevailed while a fight broke out after the game. At this point, Germany's fairy tale run was starting to grab more of the attention of the planet. Klinsmann's brand of exciting, fast-paced, attacking football had changed the way the world viewed Germany, and more importantly, the way Germans viewed their football. Now more than ever, the entire country was behind their team, and now more than ever, they believed. In the semis, Germany took on Italy, a nation that they had never defeated in the World Cup. And unfortunately, it was much the same, as the Germans conceded 2 goals in the last 90 seconds of extra time. And thus came the end of Sommermärchen 2006, the summer fairy tale. But this was just the beginning of something very special. After leading Germany to a 3rd place finish, Klinsmann opted not to extend his contract and resigned. Fans were hoping Klinsmann would stay, but the national team was still in good hands with his successor, Joachim Löw. 2 years into Löw's tenure, he led Germany's youth revolution past the group stage of the European Championship for the first time since 1996. In the quarters, the Germans took care of Portugal in a 5-goal thriller, which featured a brilliant performance from Bastian Schweinsteiger, who looked like every 2000 stereotype in one. This was followed by a thriller against Turkey, where Philipp Lahm scored a winner in the 90th minute. Then in the final, Germany played another revolutionary movement, the tiki-taka movement of the emerging Spaniards. The Germans lost to them 1-0 after conceding an early goal from Fernando Torres when he wasn't a meme yet. This would end up being Michael Ballack's last rodeo due to an injury that kept him out of the World Cup in 2010, which really just sums up his career entirely. Like the number 13 on his shirt, Michael Ballack was incredibly unlucky. Along with the runners-up finish in 2008, there was also, of course, 2002 when he had to sit on the sidelines and watch his team lose in the final. Ballack was also part of the Leverkusen team that balled the league, lost in the DFB Pokal, and lost in the Champions League final. Something similar occurred in the 2007-08 season while he played for Chelsea. That being said, Ballack still won multiple Bundesliga titles, domestic cups, and a Premier League title. He also won German Player of the Year 4 times throughout his illustrious career. And in 98 caps, he scored 42 goals for the national team, putting him 9th overall in Germany's all-time top scorers as a midfielder. In an era of flair and flamboyance, Ballack's name isn't mentioned much, but he was one of the best midfielders of his time. Oh yeah, many saw him as quite handsome at the time, and while researching I came across this video dedicated to his eyes from 17 years ago. You know, it's not really because of the history or like all that kind of stuff. This is why I love making these videos, because I just come across stuff like this all the time. In 2009, Germany was really starting to reap the benefits of Das REBOOT. 22-year-old midfielder Sami Khedira and 20-year-old defender Jerome Boateng made their debuts. By the way, Boateng's brother Kevin was the reason why Ballack missed the World Cup in 2010. That challenge was after a slap, mind you. 20-year-old future assist king Mesut Ozil dished out 14 assists for Werder Bremen in the 2008-09 season, and this earned him his first cap in early 2009. Then there was 23-year-old goalkeeper Manuel Neuer, who impressed in the U21 Euros with 4 clean sheets in 5 matches to help the Germans win the tournament. 2010 saw 2 more notable youngsters. 20-year-old Toni Kroos ended the 2009-10 season with 9 goals and 12 assists for Bayer Leverkusen. The young midfielder was from a small city in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, so had it not been for Das REBOOT, he would have slipped through the cracks like many before him. Lastly, there was Thomas Müller. No relation. The 19-year-old forward recorded 13 goals and 11 assists for Bayern Munich in the 2009-10 Bundesliga season, and the country did not have to wait long for the teenager to make his mark. Müller scored 1 and assisted another in Germany's steamrolling of Australia in their World Cup 2010 opener. In their second game, however, Germany started poorly against Serbia. But no worries, because Germany were awarded a penalty and these guys are automatic at the spot. Podolski that day joined a special list of German national team players who missed from the spot. Before him, there were just 2. Nonetheless, the national team bounced back against Ghana thanks to Mesut Ozil, and Germany won its group. In the knockouts, the Germans destroyed the worst England team ever 4-1, where nothing of note happened that would change the way we approached officiating forever. Trust me. The quarterfinals then set up a rematch between Argentina and Germany, but unlike 2006, this wasn't even close. I remember watching this game and seeing Germany make Argentina look like a team of school children. Hell, they made Lionel Messi look like a rejected beetle rather than a footballer that day. Anyways, Germany returned to the semis for a second straight time, but just like 4 years prior, this was where they fell. And this time, it was those pesky Spaniards again. For a second consecutive time, the national team finished 3rd in the World Cup, beating Uruguay 3-2, and this was the start of an unbelievable 15 competitive match win streak. This world record even stretched out out into Euro 2012, where Germany was featured in the group of death. The tournament also saw the emergences of 23-year-old defender Mats Hummels and 27-year-old striker Mario Gomez. But once they reached the semis, the Germans' incredible streak came to an end by the hands of none other than the Italians. By 2014, German football was at the peak of its powers. 12 years prior, 60% of players in the Bundesliga were foreign, but now that number had reversed. Not to mention, 2013 saw the first all-German Champions League final between Bayern Munich and Borussia Dortmund. Young gun Mario Götze was ruled out for this match, but he was called up to the World Cup 2014 squad a year later, as was Chelsea's Andre Schürrle. The run-up to this tournament was hyped up by exciting superstars, yet it was a team that made the biggest statement as Germany toyed with Portugal and won 4-0. In the match, JOGI Löw experimented with a fluid front three without a natural striker at the expense of the midfield, and he continued that experiment against Ghana. While it started out well with the goal from Mario Götze, the MANNSCHAFT then conceded 2 unanswered in just 9 minutes. Luckily, Miroslav Klose came off the bench to save the day, and with that goal, he also equalized the all-time World Cup goals record of 15. Germany then ended their group campaign with an easy victory against a Jurgen Klinsmann-led US team to win the group. However, Joachim Löw for a second time got it all wrong with his experiment in the last 16 against Algeria, but fortunately for him, Franz Beckenbauer had turned on hacks. And after a goalless 90 minutes, Germany pestered the Algerian keeper throughout extra time and then finally found the breakthrough thanks to Andre Schürrle's stylish heel chop. Mesut Ozil then put the game to bed with the second in the 120th minute. But having recognized that his team was very fortunate to have scratched by, Löw decided to go back to basics, bring back a proper number 9 in Klose up front, and bolster up the midfield again. It paid off immediately as they took down France in the quarterfinal with an early header from Mats Hummels. Next in the semis was a rematch of the 2002 World Cup final between Brazil and Germany. Two of the biggest heavyweights in international football would meet in football's mecca, and everyone waited in gleaming anticipation for an absolute classic. One problem though. Neymar was ruled out due to an injury, and Thiago Silva, Brazil's best defender, was suspended. But I'm sure this match will still be unforgettable. And it definitely was. Joachim Löw's high pressing overwhelmed the opposition into mistake after mistake. This was like watching a blind man be beaten by someone twice their size. Countless times you'd see a German player glide through a defense more non-existent than Alexi Lalas's credibility. The Germans were like a machine, and all Brazil could do was watch as another pass across their defense teased them before being blasted into the net with precision. In one 6-minute period, Germany scored 4 goals. This felt like a funeral the way the broadcast kept showing us videos of Brazilians crying their eyes out. Hell, I think I've seen funerals look more joyful than this. Germany absolutely humiliated their foes to the point that a certain adult site was begging people to stop uploading the match to their platform with the title, "Young Brazilians Get by entire German national team." After 90 minutes, Germany won 7-1, and the amount of records they broke was astronomical. Biggest winning margin in a World Cup semi, worst loss by a host country in World Cup history, fastest 4 goals scored in World Cup history. And with Miroslav Klose's only goal in this match, he became the all-time leading World Cup top scorer with 16 goals, surpassing Brazil's Ronaldo. With that win, however, Germany advanced to the final where they'd face Lionel Messi's Argentina in a rematch of the infamous 1990 final. After a goalless 90 minutes, an Andre Schürrle delivery met Mario Götze in the box, who chested and gracefully volleyed the Brazuca into the net. Nothing could have encapsulated that Die Mannschaft brand more than 2 super subs linking up for the game winner against the nation holding the greatest player on the planet. And for a 4th time, Germany were world champions. Following Germany's World Cup feat, several players retired from the national team, including Per Mertesacker, Miroslav Klose, and captain Philipp Lahm. Die Mannschaft were still a strong team, but these losses had JOGI Löw struggling to find replacements, especially in the number 9 role. As a result, throughout Euro 2016 qualifiers, Germany struggled as the team differentiated between Muller and Götze up front.
Was there?
Then when I slid I told her to come over, but after that, hold
Yep, get him out of there.
This carried on into the tournament where Germany won their group playing football that was, just okay. Löw then made some changes which saw 21-year-old fullback Joshua Kimmich replace Benedikt Hövedes. He then experimented with natural striker Mario Gomez up top. The switches paid off and Germany beat Slovakia in comfortable fashion. But just when you thought Germany was back to its normal self, Löw again tinkered with the squad ahead of a quarter-final bout against Italy.
What?
The manager switched to a back three and completely stifled his own attack. And after the two traded blows, the game would be decided by the funniest penalty shootout in recent time. It starts pretty normal, with Kid Thunder and Toni Kroos both converting. Simone was up next, and I guess he was on the Zaza, because what the hell was that? But to the shock of everyone, a German misses, and we're still level. Barzagli then goes no nonsense down the middle, Ozil next, and yet another German misses. Advantage Italy. Next, Graziano Pella, with a chance to extend the lead, tells Neuer he's going to chip him. Bold words to the best keeper on the planet. I sure hope you can back them up. Thanks to Pella, Draxler is able to drag Germany back level. This was then followed by a shocker from Italy's main penalty taker, which now gave Bastian Schweinsteiger the opportunity to, the shootout proceeded into sudden death, and now all of a sudden, competency returned. After 3 sets of successful penalties, however, Neuer saved Matteo Darmian's attempt. Jonas Hector then scored his, and Germany finally defeated Italy in a competitive fixture to sneak into the next round. Unfortunately, with Mats Hummels and Sami Khedira out due to injury, and Mario Gomez being suspended, Germany lost 2-0 to France in the semis. After the tournament, Bastian Schweinsteiger announced his retirement, and with it, Joachim Löw not only lost a strong leader, but the brain of his slowly deteriorating squad. Germany entered World Cup 2018 with most of its core past its prime, excluding 27-year-old İlkay Gündoğan, 23-year-old Joshua Kimmich, and 24-year-old attacking midfielder Julian Draxler. Do we really want to include Draxler in this? However, Jogi Löw was hoping an injection of the new generation would fill in the shortcomings. Players like 22-year-old defender Niklas Süle, 23-year-old midfielder Leon Goretzka, and 22-year-old winger Julian Brandt. However, the biggest prospect going into the tournament was 22-year-old Leroy Sané. In 2017-18, he scored 14 goals and assisted 19 in all competitions for Man City, earning him Premier League's Young Player of the Year award in the process. Oh, what's that? He wasn't called up? Well, why the f not? Löw also needed to once again figure out who he'd play up top, and he called up 2 strikers. 32-year-old Mario Gomez, who was pretty underwhelming in 2017-18, and then there was human dart Timo Werner.
I play a lot of Fortnite.
The 22-year-old scored 20 goals in all competitions, but while that may sound great on paper, he scored most of those goals in transition. For Germany, it would be the opposite. He'd have to find a way to create space for himself in their possession-dominant playstyle. None of these concerns came even close to touching the headlines, however, because a couple months before the tournament, Mesut Ozil and İlkay Gündoğan, both German footballers of Turkish descent, caused a massive shitstorm in German politics when they posed with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan.
Rubrika Experimente.
Erdogan at the time was up for re-election and was banned from holding campaign rallies in Germany after a Turkish journalist for a German newspaper was arrested by Turkish authorities. It should also be mentioned that over 1.2 million people in Germany with a Turkish background were eligible to vote, which is probably why German diplomats weren't too happy about this. Now, while some were valid takes, there were others that were just on the far right saying like, oh, this is why immigration doesn't work. Those people can go f themselves for all I care. But DFB chief at the time, Reinhard Grindel, responded to the controversy by denouncing the two footballers' actions, stating, quote, "The DFB stands for values that Mr. Erdogan does not sufficiently respect." Which, like, I mean, yeah. Erdogan, however, defended the meeting as simply a gesture of politeness. However, many still criticized Ozil and Gündoğan for being used as political tools, especially after Emre Can, another German of Turkish descent, reportedly declined an invitation from Erdogan. Many even called for the exclusions of Ozil and Gündoğan from the squad. However, Joachim Löw came to the defense of the two and eventually called them up. Germany started their tournament with a match against Mexico. And while there were concerns of who was Germany's best number 9, a far bigger problem was exposed in this match: Germany's midfield. 31-year-old past his prime Sami Khedira was deployed in a double pivot and looked completely out of his element. This left the center backs often stretched out because of the overwhelming amount of gaps Khedira left for them. So with Mexico working with all the space in the world, Germany were shocked 1-0, their first opening loss since 1982. Löw switched out Khedira for 28-year-old Sebastian Rudy for the next game against Sweden, and it proved to be the right move, but Germany still found themselves down after just 30 minutes.
Sami, my name is Ludwig, I'm from Swedish media. You know, when you lose against Sweden on Saturday, you're already on your way home, so I have some boarding passes for you and your teammates.
However, the Germans found a way back through Marco Reus early in the second half. Then Toni Kroos called game after scoring a brilliant last-minute free kick to snatch all 3 points away. Needing a win to advance, Löw decided to make multiple changes, including taking out an underwhelming Thomas Müller for Leon Goretzka. He also started Niklas Süle due to Jerome Boateng's red card in the last game. And then he brought back Sami Khedira. Why do you do that? Nevertheless, just like the previous 2 matches, the high-end talent of Germany's attack would do absolutely nothing. Germany averaged the second most passes per 90 and the most shots per 90, but couldn't create anything of substance throughout the entire tournament. And remember the team's concerns about who would start up front? Well, Joachim Löw chose Timo Werner. And in 3 games, he had 7 shots. Germany's attack was so ineffective that all you had to do was sit back. That's it. I don't even think there was any need to move, because even if the opposition did, the Germans were blinded by their own egos. How did they have ego even after the first 2 performances? God f***ing knows. And so, having played down to their competition, again, Germany f***ed around, found out, and crashed out in disgrace. The tournament for Germany was over, but the drama was just beginning. After remaining silent about the photo with Erdogan for months, Özil finally spoke out defending his right to meet the Turkish president. He stated that the treatment he received by the Federation and others made him no longer want to wear the German national team shirts. Özil then dropped a massive bombshell when he accused the DFB president of racism, saying, quote, "I am German when we win, but I am an immigrant when we lose." Following more accusations, including Özil being disappointed but not surprised that his Turkish roots were disrespected by DFB officials, he retired from the national team. And a few days later, after a ton of backlash from fans and even Bayern president Uli Hoeneß, Özil revealed that he was racially abused by a supporter after the match against Sweden and had been receiving hate mail and threats on social media. However, the DFB denied all allegations, but did say the photo raised questions for many in Germany.
What do you mean by that?
Don't get me wrong, Erdogan bad. But that doesn't mean Özil should be having to face discrimination. Also, as far as I'm concerned, there wasn't any formal investigation into the abuse Özil received. The DFB was also criticized for being out of touch with fans. Before the tournament, Euro 96 hero turned national team director Oliver Bierhoff stylized the team into a brand. He created questionable slogans like "Best Never Rest," which alienated the team from its grassroots. The national team also had the slogan #ZSMMN, which is the word zusammen without the vowels. The word means together, which was pretty ironic considering the national team was often criticized for its lack of interactions with fans before, during, and after the tournament. Months after the storm had passed, though, Joachim Löw organized a press conference that lasted almost 2 hours where he addressed Germany's failures in Russia. One of his biggest points was the fact that Germany overlooked every single opponent in their group. Löw added he was convinced that with his tactics, Germany would be able to get through to the knockouts, and then from there, the manager would make some adjustments. Another problem he addressed was targeted at the players, citing a lack of enthusiasm and fire in the group. He said, quote, "The team approached things very strategically but missed other things." Even after Germany's worst performance in a World Cup since 1938, the DFB stuck with Joachim Löw. The fans, on the other hand, were growing more and more impatient, especially after Germany were manhandled by Spain 6-0 in the 2020 Nations League. Aggravation only grew when months prior to Euro 2020, Germany lost to North Macedonia at home in World Cup 2022 qualifiers. Nevertheless, the DFB continued to back Jogi Löw, which was completely on brand considering the Federation hadn't sacked a manager in their entire history. Not even Eric Riebeck. Löw said in 2019 he was moving on without players like Mats Hummels, Jerome Boateng, and Thomas Müller. However, in the end, he had a change of heart and called up Hummels and Müller to the Euro 2020 squad. Compared to 2018, Germany's squad for Euro 2020 was a breath of fresh air. There were new attacking options like 22-year-old Kai Havertz, 25-year-old Serge Gnabry, and thankfully this time, 25-year-old Leroy Sané. None of that really mattered though, because barely any player actually fit Jogi Löw's system. The Germans were lucky to pull a draw out of their asses against Hungary to barely advance to the next round, where they were then dusted by England. Realizing his time was officially done and the game was past him, Joachim Löw finally stepped down after the tournament after 15 years in charge. Midfielder Toni Kroos announced his retirement after Euro 2020 as well. He played a massive role in the 2014 winning team with his incredible distribution of the ball and delicate technical ability. Replacing Joachim Löw was not an easy task, but the DFB felt pretty satisfied with their selection of Hansi Flick. The appointment of Flick saw newfound excitement within the German fan base, as he had just come off winning a mind-blowing sextuple with Bayern Munich. He also had previous experience with the national team when he was an assistant coach in the 2014 World Cup. During the beginning of the Flick era, Germany started well with a 7-game winning streak throughout the rest of World Cup Qatar qualifiers. But seeing how this was their group, the results kinda just papered over the cracks. And in 2022, those cracks started to show again. The Germans struggled in their Nations League group, and with every game that was played, it seemed like the DFB team was regressing. That was most evident in their last 2 Nations League fixtures, where they lost to Hungary and then bottled a 2-0 lead against England. By the time the Winter World Cup arrived 2 months later, German fans didn't have much hope going into the tournament. But as you've seen time and time again, this wasn't anything new. Where there is a will, there is always a way, and the national team, like they've done so many times before, would find that way to prove the doubters wrong once again. Hansi Flick is showing a film about geese to motivate his players. Oh no. Oh no. This is bad. This is bad. Alright, no need to panic yet. Germany still have a younger and more talented squad than 2018. Okay, well, Germany still has lots to look forward to in teenager Jamal Musiala. The 19-year-old attacking midfielder was on fire prior to the World Cup with 11 goals and 9 assists. With Germany needing that X factor to break down defenses, Musiala with his magical runs was the answer. Another player ready to make his mark was 29-year-old Niklas Füllkrug. Before the tournament, he scored 10 goals for Werder Bremen in their return to the Bundesliga. He even scored on his international debut in a friendly right before the World Cup. More importantly for Germany, at last they found themselves a natural number 9 to lead the front. Why isn't he starting? Germany kicked off their tournament with the match against Japan, and they started well. They controlled the game and eventually reaped the benefits in the 33rd minute. A much better start than 2018, but removed that penalty, and it was the same exact Germany that couldn't break down a team to save their lives. In the first half alone, Germany had 14 shots, and their quote-unquote number 9, Kai Havertz, didn't take a single one of them. The patterns continued in the second half as Germany's attack displayed less effectiveness than US gun registration. As minutes passed, Japan then started finding some rhythm, and Germany is starting to lose its grip on the game. However, Hansi Flick responds quickly by subbing off İlkay Gündoğan, their best performing player. Now with no mediator, the German midfield loses its composure. Japan find more opportunities within the giant holes Germany is leaving, and an equalizer happens in the 75th minute. But don't worry, Flick has another trick up his sleeve. He then subs in 30-year-old Mario Götze, and out goes Germany's other best performing player, Jamal Musiala.
What the f***ing hell's happening?
This goes just as you'd expect, and then after a miscommunication between the center backs, Germany concede again and once more lose their opener. Germany's next game was against the pesky Spaniards, a rematch of the 2010 semi-final. Spain wanted to take care of the group with another win, while Germany needed to rebound quickly. Before the match, however, thanks to Germany's All or Nothing release this year, we got to see some scenes leading up to that game. One included a team meeting where the manager used an odd analogy to reflect upon Germany's lackluster performance versus Japan.
Der Jogi hat mal eben einen Spruch losgelassen und genauso bin wir gestern Abend vorgekommen. Ja? Da hat er gesagt, was nützt dir eine Kuh, die 10 Liter Milch am Tag gibt und am Abend mit dem Schwanz den Eimer umhaut?
I don't really think that works with this scenario, but I'll tell you where it does. For Germany's lineup versus Spain, despite calling up a natural number 9, Hansi Flick picked Thomas Müller. This guy has never been a striker in his entire career. And surprise, surprise, Germany's attack was so bad that defender Antonio Rudiger had more shots than anyone else in the first half. Then in the second half, with human refrigerator Niklas Süle sleeping in the back, Germany concede, but worst of all, now stare down the barrel of elimination again. With the alarm bells ringing, Flick finally subs on Niklas Füllkrug in the 70th minute, and in just 13 minutes, the striker saves the nation from doom. The match ends 1-1, and luckily for the Germans, they are still alive thanks to Japan's loss to Costa Rica. But in order for the Germans to advance, they not only needed to beat Costa Rica, but also needed to see Spain beat the Japanese. And luckily for Hansi Flick, Leroy Sané was back at 100%, so he could potentially provide a punch or two to Germany's offense. Oh, but look at that! Hansi is still choosing Müller. Nonetheless, Germany have a fiery start to the game and score within the first 10 minutes. 1 minute later, Spain gained the lead versus Japan. But within a blink of an eye in the second half, Spain gets flashbanged by the Japanese and now all of a sudden find themselves losing. Meanwhile, things are starting to go to shit for Germany as they concede 2 straight goals in a matter of 12 minutes.
Go, go, go!
Fortunately though, thanks to super subs Kai Havertz and Niklas Füllkrug, Germany come back to win 4-2. Unfortunately for them, however, Spain lost to the Blue Samurai, meaning for a second straight time, Germany had crashed out in the groups.
Fuck this shit. Fuck
this
Flick's clueless decision-making was responsible for a significant chunk of Germany's failures, as was his inability to get the team to form any kind of chemistry, and it didn't help that the head coach kept second-guessing himself throughout the whole tournament. But another problem was that he simply couldn't motivate his players. This was how every pre-match talk went. The team would form a circle around the dressing room. Hansi Flick would then say with no charisma whatsoever something probably grabbed off the script of Goal 3, which was then followed by a player doing a far better pep talk to arouse the little emotions the whole German team had. Mind you, they weren't even starters. Niklas Füllkrug motivated the team better than Hansi Flick. Kevin f***ing Trapp, who at 32 years old with 6 caps, had more conviction in his words than German Berhalter.
Aber ich erwarte einfach von euch, ja, dass ihr allen zeigt. Und da gehört dazu, dass wir pünktlich sind, wenn wir was sagen. Ist es klar? Wir können ruhig mal Emotionen sagen und sagen, ja, na klar, ist es klar.
This man is literally Jeb Bush. How the hell did you fall this far, Germany?
We're prepared to act in the national security interests of this country to get back in the business of creating a more peaceful world. Please clap.
And when Joshua Kimmich was asked about his thoughts after the loss to Japan, he said it took a significant toll on the team and explained he looked around the dressing room and it looked like the team had already been knocked out. And with a lack of an effective motivator, no one was there to dig the team out of their rut and lead them forward. They were just stuck in this state of demoralization throughout the whole tournament. You can say the manager didn't have much time with the squad, but after all we've seen, I can confidently say Hansi Flick was an absolute failure in every regard at this World Cup. But I guess the DFB saw it differently, because after the World Cup, Hansi Flick was trusted to continue on with the national team.
That means I can do whatever I want, and you can cry about it! So screw you! I didn't say or do anything wrong, and I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere.
And it went just as you'd expect it. Flick continued to fail in fixing the national team's issues, and they went winless in 5 straight fixtures. The implosion was then capped off by a beating at the hands of Japan and Germany, which led to a historic sacking of Hansi Flick, because he became the first ever German national team manager to be sacked.
Do you know Hansi Flick?
Sorry?
Do you know Hansi Flick?
Hansi Flick. Was ist das?
Now, while Flick had continued to make dumb decisions like playing Nico Schlotterbeck at left back against Japan, the DFB made an even dumber decision, keeping the manager only to sack him after 6 games with the Euros less than a year away. Quick reminder, by the way, Germany hosts that tournament. Hell, even the youth national team is in shambles right now. Just last year, Germany crashed out of their U21 Euro group without a single victory. All of that was recorded in October. It's now the end of February. Anyways, let's start where we left off. So, what has gone wrong with the German national team? To start, the squad is no doubt fractured, is as cliquey as an American high school, and there hasn't been a leader to gel the team together since, quite honestly, Philipp Lahm. Joshua Kimmich is probably the next best option, but that's like saying Joe Biden is the best the US can do.
Many American people have been watching, and they have expressed concerns about your age.
That is your judgment. That is your judgment. Conduct of the response.
And because of all this, the underachieving in tournaments, the team being fractured, there's just a lack of passion in the team's play. However, some figures in the squad will convince you otherwise and say that it's actually the fans' fault that the team lacks passion. In particular, Kai Havertz in September 2023 said regarding Germany's recent World Cup campaign, "We had no support. There were also other reasons for this, we understand that. But there was also no support in terms of football. We were on our own. What other teams had for support, that was a bit missing for us. It is always said that the fans are the 12th man. We didn't always feel that 100%. To a certain degree, he's right. Teams with an immense amount of support can definitely improve their performances on the pitch. Look at Morocco, for example. Sure, they had a fantastic group of players and a coach that could get the best out of his team, but you would be lying to yourself if you said the constant roaring from fans in the stadium didn't play a big part in their Cinderella run. That said, to downplay Germany's entire situation and just say, quote, "there were also other reasons," is quite honestly laughable. Let's go back to before the opening match of World Cup 2022, when multiple nations, including Germany, planned to have their captains wear an armband to bring attention to Qatar's harsh oppression of LGBTQ+ members. FIFA, in response to this protest, downright banned the armband and threatened heavy sanctions on the federations. And this was enough to expose the fragility of every federation that was claiming to fight for human rights. especially the DFB, because they had been advocating for human rights in Qatar since early 2021, and as a result, a good amount of fans started backing that cause. And naturally, fans who were calling for a boycott felt betrayed when Germany still went on to travel to Qatar and compete. The fans who decided to stick around then turned their backs on the national team after they saw further evidence of how truly shallow the players' protests were. So listen, Kai, you're right. Fans are your 12th man, but you and your teammates decided to betray their trust and show that your words were completely meaningless. You can claim that shitty hand-over-the-mouth gesture was all you could do in response, but all that did was expose your actions over the years as nothing but useless performative activism. After the sacking of Hansi Flick, the DFB appointed Julian Nagelsmann. He's no doubt an excellent manager, but the main concern is how committed is he to leading this national team? Because more than anything, an elite national team needs stability, and one of the main components of that is a long-lasting and successful coach. And the problem with such a young coach is that he might still be heavily interested in a return to club football. That's only an assumption though. Only Nagelsmann knows his own aspirations at the end of the day. Talking about club football, however, one look at the best teams in Germany will show you another problem. There is a lack of German talent in the Bundesliga. In fact, if you look at the past few years, most of the top talents in Germany have been foreign, which is a product of clubs like Bayern and Dortmund focusing more on immediate club success in an effort to stay up there with the other elite clubs in Europe. And why wait a few years to develop an academy talent when you could just buy an already established youngster from overseas? That all said, the league still has uber promising German players like 20-year-old Jamal Musiala, but even then, he spent most of his time developing in England, which exposes an even deeper issue in German football: the youth development system. With success comes complacency, as we've seen time and time again throughout this entire video, and once more, Germany has fallen behind their competitors in developing players. To start, German academies have prioritized scouting kids, and due to this, a lot of late bloomers are being missed out on, and those who are scouted are being pampered in a football bubble 24/7. They never have to face and solve problems on their own because there will always be someone there to baby them. And this could be a big reason why the national team over the years has lost their identity of being the best team. Because now, the DFB is producing players who feel entitled to anything due to the way they were brought up in the academy. They done created your average MLS Next team. And the only thing every German kid should be entitled to is the ball. And a lot of them aren't even getting that. According to a study done in 2020, out of 53 youth football coaches working in either England, Germany, Portugal, or Spain, it was concluded that German kids had less time on the ball and were spending a significant amount of time on fitness without the ball instead. And on top of the fact that when they actually do play with the ball, it's 7-on-7 matches, so players are having a hard time actually getting their touches. This hyperfixation on everything but the ball could have a lot to do with the fact that the youth football in Germany has a completely different mindset to other more successful nations. Just like clubs now, youth teams are aiming for immediate success right off the bat, meaning instead of honing their boundless creativity, kids are instead limited to a certain style to fit a team where the only goal is to win. And this winning mentality at an age as early as 7 has stifled any kind of potential to develop players with their own styles of individuality. Children aren't allowed to have freedom, express themselves, make mistakes, and learn from them. Everything has to be the same. It's no longer fun, and you're seeing that in how kids in Germany now more than ever are quitting when they get older because they've simply lost their passion and love for the game. To sum this all up, Germany's national team successes have been associated with characteristics like efficiency and winning, but the DFB has taken this way too far. They're thinking like adults in a children's game. However, thankfully, the Federation finally realized their errors and reforms were made last year to make sure that football is fun for the kids again. Taking a page out of Belgium's youth revolution, the DFB has developed small-sided games that way everyone can touch the ball, develop their skills, and of course, most importantly, have fun. Toxic league culture has also been removed and replaced, which is good because 6-year-olds should not have to worry about league football. To most, these reforms are great, but there have been criticisms from some of the most notable figures in Germany, one of which includes Borussia Dortmund CEO Hans-Joachim Watzke. He called the changes, quote, incomprehensible, and even said later in the future, quote, we'll be playing without a ball, or we'll make it a square, so it won't roll away from the slightly slower youngsters. Like, shut the f up, you Jerry. In my personal opinion, these reforms are a great start to re-revolutionizing the game in Germany. Now all that's left is a unique style of German football because that's how Das Reboot really kicked off. Looking at the national team now, it's pretty shambolic, and there's no telling how this team will perform for the next few years. But there is light amidst the darkness that the DFB can build upon for the future. I'm of course talking about Germany's U17 World Cup title last year, and by no means was this any fluke. They had to beat Spain, Argentina, and then France in the final. 18-year-old World forward Paris Brunner won the Golden Ball in the tournament, and it's the first time a German has won the award since Toni Kroos in 2007. This isn't to say Germany is returning to the top soon. Youth tournaments can only say so much. Just remember, Jean-Kevin Augustin won Golden Boot in the 2016 U19 Euros. You know who else played on that team? Mbappe. However, it is something that can be built upon while Germany's new revolution begins. But until then, Julian Nagelsmann has one hell of a job ahead of him. We did it. We finally did it, everyone. The video's complete. I started this script in early September. It is March. It's been 6 months. Once again, I'm so sorry that it took eons to get this video out, but it is a long video and I just had so many other things just kind of pop up within my schedule, so it just stopped me from ever being able to work on this, put it together, all that kind of stuff. But a massive shout out to my editor, because while I edited a good amount of this, if it wasn't for him, there'd still be a lot that I have to get done, and this probably would have been out in like April or something, so big thank you to him for that. And of course, a massive shout out to all you patrons, including Janos Balas, Chris Damasceno, Miliway009, A Wise Orange, Anasir Makalankam, Audipu, Alex Rod, Ulta, Anaya20, Arai San, Billy Jack, Daniel Ortiz, Hysteria, Miguel Munoz, Return Fire, Rory Burns, Sliderkit, Snifferx, Takuoka Fan, Tana Permelia Celine Khan, Tomicus, Victor, Chris Visconti, Dominic Griffin, Louis, Joe Paricio, Kentra Hagatra, Kyler Krebs, Lucian Von Croix, Niche, Patrick Barley, Rashford God 5, Raspberry Ale, Rowan Cookie, Sylvia Citrus. Subscribe to 10-Day Tem and Unbroken Persona. If you'd like to join the Patreon, there'll be a link down below and up in the annotations. You can follow my Twitter if you want, follow my Instagram if you like. You can follow my TikTok, I guess, but I think I would highly suggest following my Twitch, because sometimes I stream and it's fun. But until then, I'll see you guys. Testing 1 2 3, testing 1 2 3. Alright, second fucking recording. Let's get this shit done.